phase of the real estate market here in Toronto? Are we still the kind of pimply, awkward teenager? I don't know. I think we're starting to mature a little bit, right? We're getting categorized in these ways. We're trying to solve housing problems with strategies being used by some of the largest markets around the world. Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates, and you're listening to the largest, fastest growing podcast for Toronto real estate on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. It's a bit of snowfall out there today, but that doesn't mean things are cooling down when it comes to real estate. Toronto's housing market is hotter than ever, and Toronto is beginning to ask some tough questions. Could there be sweeping policy changes on the horizon? Some of the things we're going to talk about today include where are we in our market and what are some of the considerations the city has on resolving things. Even though we're rounding into the month of December this year, honestly, we're still seeing our podcast grow like crazy. We tend to see some kind of seasonality even with our show, but this year it seems like it's just going up and up and up thanks to viewers like you. I really appreciate the support you guys offer, but today's a beautiful day. Lots of snowfall, as you can see if you're watching us on YouTube. I've got a shirt that says Happy Birthday Jesus, a couple of my favorite fellers on my shirt, Santa and Jesus himself. And I'm excited because today we're going to be able to go outside, play with the girls. After I'm recording, I plan on going out and making a snowman. But Daddy, can we make a snow woman this year? No, honey, we're making him with snowballs. Oh, we like to have some fun in the show. Hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, please consider liking, subscribing, whatever it takes. Get the word out there. Share it with your friends on social. You can tag us at Watson Estates. And if you haven't already, please join our off-market investors list. We like to send out off-market deals, power of sale deals. We also like to send out small apartment buildings. We've got a few great opportunities coming down the pipes if you guys are interested in that. But also coming soon, we're going to be announcing the 90-day Landlord Coaching program. Still putting that together as time allows. And in the new year, we're going to have that launching. I'm really excited to take those of you who are investors with a few properties and showing you how some of the guests we have had on our show do it in scaling it to a behemoth of a portfolio. That is the target of that program. But let's jump right into the content. Today, we're going to start off talking about the state of our housing market before we get into, different options or opportunities that are maybe out there, things people are considering doing to fix it. We got to understand where we're at. We're going to start off with a blog TO article. Reads, experts say Toronto's scorching housing market is hotter than ever. Interesting article to get in the end of November going into December. Here's what it says. Toronto's sizzling real estate market may be entering its annual winter chill, but that doesn't mean we can't expect a broader market cool down to persist. The market still simmering through an expected seasonal dip. Many people, they say expected. It was generally accepted that things were cooling down. I mean, we called bogus on that pretty quickly, and as we expected, it actually has continued to progress upwards, and I think that trend will continue, despite seeing occasional articles that say, bidding wars aren't coming through, things aren't happening. We'd have to appreciate, we're in December, guys. We're in December. There shouldn't be conversations about a hot market in December. We should be thinking about Christmas, but instead, we're thinking about buying a house off Amazon. Extreme highs in housing prices, sales activity, and demand have RE/MAX agents suggesting that despite the expected seasonal cool down, which was very short-lived, Toronto is experiencing, quote, hotter than ever conditions in autumn 2021. But why? So here's the reason they give. As usual, real estate experts are pointing to a critically low supply of homes, which fuels competition and drives up housing prices. But remember, we recently came through the stats that we got from last month, October. When we look at those, we saw the city of Toronto's residential listings, active listings, declined sharply, falling 43%. 43% year over year. We thought last year was tight going into the second half of the year. This year, it's just crazy. While new listings also plummeted 31%. Not only are the active listings not there, but people aren't interested in the next couple months. We don't want it. We want to list anyways. So it's only getting worse. And we don't see that same scale of increasing in sales. We do see historically high sales, but in contrast to the amount of listings, it's getting tighter. In fact, the month of inventory sits at 1.4 months, meaning that if nothing else were to be added to our market today, in a month and a half, realistically, every single unit for sale in the city would be sold. It'd be gone. When we look at prices, the average selling price for all home categories rose, listen to this, 18.3%. Now, if you listen to our past shows, you know that favors the low-rise single-family homes. The condos have been lagging a bit, but I just wanted to give you guys a bit of a recap on that. But one of the things that also came out was Toronto ranked 6 out of 80 global cities for remote work attractiveness. I thought that was interesting. And why so? Why so? Why I find that interesting is this debate between whether people will come back into the city. There seems to be this general consensus that people are starting to move back. I'm noticing this inwards movement, not just for housing, but for work, for employment, for education. We're starting to see a lot more coming back into Toronto proper. Well, in the meantime, there's this kind of group that expects there to be a long-term implications. People sprawled out and they're not coming back, whether by choice or by force. They're going to stay further out. Well, Toronto is well positioned based on this. Montreal as well. Actually, Montreal positioned itself even higher up the list, but Toronto is ranked 6th out of 80 global cities, meaning that if you could make, based on this, a case for the remote working continuing, not necessarily coming back, which is a good thing for those of you who have kind of banked on investing further away and are maybe a little fearful about this whiplash effect we're going to have as people move back into the city. But on the horizon is a massive demand, guys. 1.2 million newcomers coming to the country projected over the next 3 years, many of which come to Toronto. Many, many, many. The question is going to be for Toronto, are we equipped to receive them? And not only receive new immigration through the form of rentals over the next 3 years, but also are we in a position to allow families at the same time to be stable and live within the walls of Toronto? Or are we essentially going to push people away and heavily rely on this remote working situation we found ourselves in during COVID? And realistically, if supply is the issue, are we not building enough? Isn't there like a ton of development right now? Yes, there is. CMHC reports 65.24% year-over-year leap in housing starts in September, with shovels going into the ground for over 4,600 new units in that month alone. So yes, we see massive development, huge opportunities in the development space. But here's the thing. It's not nearly enough. When we look at a Star article called "Newly Built Houses Hit Record Price in October as Supply Dwindles," despite there seemingly being record development happening, it's not keeping up. When we look at new construction home prices, you'd think if there was a lot coming on, you'd be able to get a deal, or it'd be at least similar to the housing market. Get this, guys. It hit a record in Toronto region last month at 1.66 million benchmark, which is 36.6% above October of last year at 1.21. That's crazy. In the second month in a row, prices for newly built detached semi and townhomes rose more than 30%. 30% increase. 30% increase. Now, one of the things just as for us to remember here is the average price in the GTA, as we've just mentioned, was 18.3. But in the detached pre-construction, well over 30 for consecutive months. When we look at condos, similar to what we're seeing in the overall market for resale, they're not moving as fast, which some people look at as a loss, but generally it's still incredible. But I love how it's moderate. But condo prices are moderately growing at 6.2%, right? That's an average price growth. In the long term, that's a pretty good price growth. But anyways, the benchmark price now is at 1.05 million for condos. It is the fourth highest October for sales in the condo side of the market. That includes stacked townhomes since Altus Group began tracking back in 2000. So condos, for all intents and purposes, is doing fantastic. But when you compare it against the low rise, you think, well, that sucks. I love how we get this culture of comparison. We all compare. Can we not just look at I've found a healthy exercise I've experienced through COVID has been, instead of just comparing about all these moguls, all these people doing incredible things with different opportunities, different challenges, instead of just sitting back and saying, I want to be able to be like so-and-so, or I want to be able to beat so-and-so. I've really found the value in not doing that. Just recognize where you are. Maybe this is the coaching stuff coming out here a little bit, but just recognize where you are. Where were you 6 months ago? How did you respond to COVID? And how has your portfolio, how has your investment strategy, how have you as a person grown in the last 6 months, the last year? And if the answer is you've grown, you're moving forward, then you're doing great. Keep it up, guys. I am here to support you, to cheer you on, one step at a time. Stop focusing on the massive, build it one brick at a time. But we're going to continue. Obviously, there's a lot of pull towards the pre-construction space, as people are finding it impossible or near impossible to either find something on the resale market or win in a multiple offer situation in the resale market. They're turning to the pre-construction. Maybe there's some stability. There are a lot of investors even in the condo space turning to that as an investment. There is a bit of an inherent discount in the condo space. I won't get into that right now. So that's driving a lot of people into the pre-construction. Well, what's happening here is there's now been a surge, as we've seen, over 30% in the low rise in the development and the pre-construction. So what's happening here is they're recognizing that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. So if there's an opportunity for people in a place like Barrie, Ontario, where you've got over 70 buyers that are expected to be closing in as early, I think it was April. Yes, as early as April 2022. You know, if there's $100,000 in there, maybe there's something we can do. And they are. And they're getting bashed by the Ontario Premier. And here's what it says. Pace Developments canceled on contracts with 70 buyers in Barrie, citing price increases. The buyers who signed agreements between 2018 and 2020 were given the same two options in a letter sent by the developer. Option number one, walk away with your deposit. Or option two, buy back in for an additional $100,000. You're going to have to add a nice little chunk on there. Some of the units are scheduled, as mentioned, as early as April. So as you're investing in the condo space, as you're investing in the pre-construction space in general, now we have additional issues. We have the issues of whether they're going to actually move ahead with the project. They might say, you know, like we found ourselves in situations where people are buying a condo, but then the condo developer says, you know what, we're not going to build it. Have your deposit back. And these people feel gypped. They feel gypped. But now we also have a situation where the housing prices are doing so well that we have this silent competition happening between the developer. That was a very choice decision for them to make. But when you got 70 units and $100,000, that's not a bad amount of money for them to be clawing back from these buyers. And that's why they're doing it. Despite the calls from the Premier saying it's a bad idea, business is business, baby. And they're blaming it. The construction companies, the development companies are blaming it on the rising cost of materials. They're blaming it on the economy, which, let's face it, is pretty weak, dude. Like, we all are in the same boat here. Sometimes you just got to make it work, right? Despite what the season is. Like, for example, like this summer, I bought a unicycle because it sounds like a great idea, but I never really considered the winter, never really considered that it would be snowing. But you know what? It's pretty great, actually, in the snow. It's got an all-wheel drive. So whose fault is it for this massive price increase? The one that's forcing developers to claw back money from buyers, the one that's pinning, you know, the real estate industry, bidding wars, blind bidding wars, confusing the market, making the cold seasons hot, maybe the hot seasons cold. We'll see, depending on what happens with interest rates. But whose fault is all of this? Is it the developers? Is it parents? Yes, parents. Toronto Sun. They have it solved. High net worth parents could be fueling real estate's dramatic rise survey. The Bank of Mom and Dad, they say, is offering an average of $145,000 for a home purchase. The survey estimates the amount that is being given and will likely to be given to adult children in the years to come by affluent Canadian families total about $100 billion. What's happening there, by the way, is a massive generational wealth transfer. It's an opportunity for parents to pass without having to go through their estate, their money to their children by gifting it to them, sending it along, creating a housing opportunity and filling that demand for first-time home buyers, because there's a huge surge demand. Behind investors themselves, first-time home buyers are second as far as the buyer. The problem is money's hard to come by unless you have affluent parents. You have a wealth transfer that can happen. That is exactly what's taking place. But then the next thing is maybe it's not the parents. Maybe the parents are just being nice. Is it maybe the investors? Well, now Toronto says investment properties are driving up Toronto real estate prices. CBC.ca says investors now make up more than 25% of Ontario homebuyers, pushing prices higher, experts warn. Investors were the smallest segment of buyers 10 years ago. We talked about this on a past show. Now they are the largest. Again, as mentioned, followed by those first-time home buyers. A lot of demand. If you think about it rationally, or from at least rational in my mind, which is probably not rational at all. But when I look at it, just sitting back, if I'm seeing investors and first-time home buyers as the ones that are most excited about our market, that seems like a relatively promising future. I mean, I know it might sound crazy, but that tells me that there is a long-term opportunity or a view of long-term opportunity in our market if those two segments are banking on the market. But the blame game continues, right? It continues. We're like a bunch of snowmen sitting around looking at each other saying, do you smell carrots? Whatever it is, people are desperate. Last week we talked about this company called Key, and there's actually been further news that's come out. You guys can read up on that, but I even encourage you jump back a couple podcast episodes. You can listen to the equity splitting option and whether you guys should consider that. And generally speaking, I would say probably better not, unless you're doing it as like a meme or having some fun with it. There's a lot of red flags there, but this week we've got a new one. This idea, last week actually I was joking about housing, but it's like grandmas, you do like this grandma. Well, guess what? Now apparently it's not grandmas, but it's young people. This co-living, right? Co-living is becoming the new thing, or grown-up dorms, as they call it. Lower rent, this is thestar.com, lower rent, fewer chores. Why grown-up dorm life might be the answer for Toronto's millennials in need of affordable housing. Here's what they say. In a city where one-bedroom apartments are going for north of $2,000 a month on average, more companies are betting on co-living, a grown-up version of dorm life, to take off in Toronto the way it has in other expensive locales such as San Francisco and New York. I love when you hear Toronto categorized with San Francisco and New York. Are we entering the adult phase of the real estate market here in Toronto? Are we still the kind of pimply, awkward teenager? I don't know. I think we're starting to mature a little bit, right? We're getting categorized in these ways. We're trying to solve housing problems with strategies being used by some of the largest markets around the world. One Toronto developer has already submitted plans to build a co-living community in the Weston area, which was 26 co-living apartments, by the way, while another New York-based co-living company is planning to bring an additional 650 units here. There's a lot of plans to create this co-living space by developers, which is essentially, you got a shared townhouse, you got 4 bedrooms, exactly like how you would imagine it happen when you go off to university. And on top of that, you can kind of add these extra amenities if you want, maybe get like, I don't know, laundry services or whatever. You can kind of build it and make it kind of fun, spice it up a little bit. But essentially, you're breaking down that rent, you're splitting it up. Does that make it more affordable? Perhaps for the individual, but it also creates a massive amount of cash flow for investors if this is something that we adopt, which is maybe an opportunity for you. And with higher cash flow comes higher prices. Love how that works. With higher prices, more unaffordability. It's a vicious circle. I get it. It's a vicious circle, one in which I would rather own the asset than rent the asset. But co-living remains relatively unknown in Toronto, but that, my friends, is changing. So is the situation then beyond co-living and kind of, forcing you to be a roommate for the next 10 years as a millennial? Maybe people want to start a family. Maybe they want to move on. Maybe they don't want to, live in university for the rest of their life. So what do we do? What do we do? Is it a zoning change? So I want to start talking about some of the impacts the city has, some of the hims and haws, some of the questions, the hard questions that they're asking today. And I think a prime example to start off this dialogue is actually Laneway Houses. Last year and into this year, we talked about Laneway Houses as a massive opportunity for you to invest because though many places can do it, the prices we notice shoot up in value in those properties. One thing that I would note about that is the moment you create a platform where you can have additional housing created within, you improve the zoning of that space, property values, what do? They go way up, whether you choose to build on them or not. They go way, way up, which I want you guys to keep that in mind as we start talking about what are some of the things coming down the pipe, some opportunities here to address affordability, to address housing, and then we can really decide if that's actually a true solution. But when we look at Laneway housing, we have to look at Vancouver, because Vancouver, back in 2009, they were celebrated as the leader of laneway housing. It rezoned 95% of single-family areas to permit laneway homes behind primary residential structures. Now, obviously, you have to have a laneway. You have to, there has to be everything else involved. But the zoning it was a sweeping zoning that allowed 95% of single families to do it. And over 3,000 laneway homes have since 2009 been built. 3,000 additional suites. After passionate voices called for an adoption for years, Toronto followed suit back in 2018. According to the City of Toronto, as of May 2021, over 200 building permit applications for new laneway homes have been submitted to the city. We're not 3,000, but we're growing. We're growing. While the idea behind laneway homes is theoretically increasing rental supply in Toronto, laneway homes are hitting MLS like never before to entice home buyers, seemingly not renters, some with price tags north of $3 million. Yes, you heard that correct, $3 million. The value of the laneway in many ways becomes, from an investor's perspective, the value of the land. The opportunity to create a laneway, whether you got one or not, or add one and sell it, because I'm not doing this for additional rental income to create rental supply. Maybe the next buyer will. Who knows? Who cares? The reason I'm doing it is because I want the highest return on my investment dollars. And if that means picking up a unit, building a laneway, selling it as a laneway, moving on, flipping, then that's what I'm going to do. And that's what a lot of investors have opted to do, which is great. Good news for you as an investor. But what about for the neighborhood? Because for the neighborhood, when we run the numbers, it actually has a net negative impact in some areas. Researchers have found the presence of a laneway house within 100 meters of a property on the pricey west side of the city was associated with a 2.8% lower sales price on neighboring properties. The neighbors are taking a hit for you. Maybe that's why you sell it. They don't like you. I'm leaving, right? I'll build it. I'll come in. I'll fix it up and I'll get out. Neighbors immediately beside a new home with a laneway house experienced an even larger dip, selling 3.8% less on average than those beside new homes with a garage, but no laneway house. So if you put a laneway house and you're next door, you're essentially dropping your neighbor's value by 4%. Seems like a pretty good return for me, so who cares? The highest priced properties, the most expensive areas saw the highest drop in value if they had a laneway house next door at a significant 4.7% according to the study. Almost a 5% drop. Thanks for showing up. Sure, Drake would love that. You move in next door, you build laneway housing in the back. Apparently not, because the value of his house would go down 5%, which is probably a pretty penny at that price point. The effect is so much larger, they conclude, at the high end. Okay, so there you go. The solution, laneway housing, viable option. I think it's great. It does create housing. It's a good step, but ultimately it means higher prices. It benefits maybe the rental market, creates additional supply in the rental space, but ultimately it's going to kill the dollar amount, the value of those properties. They're going to go way, way up. So there is this kind of battle, this outside change. So keep that in mind. Here we go. The Globe and Mail published this other article called Toronto Planning Reports Signals Real Change Coming to Open the Door to New Neighbors in House-Centric Areas. Think about these areas that are very single family, very, very single family. We don't want apartments. We don't want any of those things. The NIMBYs and not in my backyard, folks. They say a wave of change is sweeping through the profession of city planning. Guys, you should be listening to this. You want to talk about we like to come up with these prediction videos kind of going into the new year, and I'm sure one of those will be coming out soon. But this is like a pre-prediction video. More likely than not, this will become part of that conversation. So you're getting an early goodie here. The profession of city planning is washing away a bad old idea that we've had that residential neighborhoods should be for houses only. Bad idea, but one that's been around for decades. We're all different, but in some ways we're the same. In the past 5 years, when we look at other countries, governments across North America, and recently the government of New Zealand, which we mentioned on our show when that happened, have all made similar reforms to legalize apartments in larger areas of their cities. So we're different in some ways, but in others, in this case, housing, we're the same. It's like snow. It's not a problem in the Middle East, but ice is. A staff report going before Council's Planning and Housing Committee on Thursday signals real changes coming to the city's house-centric neighborhoods. You want to talk about something at the city level that could really shake things up. This is it. The report is the boldest, most progressive planning policy to emerge from City Hall since the amalgamation of Toronto in 1998. It suggests, quote, multiplexes, buildings with 2, 3, 4, or more apartments on a leafy street where they are currently forbidden. Those single family home streets, all of a sudden you got a bunch of fourplexes. Seems like a lot of fun. And what kind of impact is that going to have on the neighboring property values? If a laneway house, just a property on the back, can drop a high-end property down 5%, what would a fourplex do? And a lot of the reason why these values will be hindered is because of services, right? We're bogging things down. Where are you going to park my car? I mean, I had a spot on the street, but not so much anymore when Buddy moved in 4 families. Well, the report asks these questions. For the first time in a long time, Toronto is evolving as it grows. They asked us, what kind of city do we want? How can we make room for housing to create the kind of city that we want? So there's 2 options that are currently in front of them. Number 1 is what we're describing here. You allow these single families to convert into multi-units, and it's called exclusionary zoning. We're going to remove, which is a big push from the Ontario Real Estate Association, we're going to remove exclusionary zoning. We're going to allow people to do what they will, assuming they follow the other rules, the permits and, safety, fire code, building permits, all those things. But we're going to allow, generally speaking, maybe 95%, maybe we go the whole route, right? You're going to allow these units to create multi-family homes. A fantastic opportunity for people who currently are sitting on single family homes and kind of embrace that opportunity to create housing. But what's the trade-off? The other option we have is Toronto is also considering reform through a planning effort that they call expanding housing options in neighborhoods. What's funny here is I think this should be bigger news. That's why we're talking about it on the show. That's why it's kind of the highlight of this episode, not something that's being discussed. Everyone's talking about how hot the market is, which it is. But we really are looking at what are the options at the table, what are being discussed at the government level, at advocacy group levels. This is it here. So right now, the city creates, this is option 2, the city creates many regulatory and financial obstacles to constructing small apartment buildings. Planning would like to remove these barriers, make it easier. The result could be buildings with 3 or 4 units everywhere and low-rise apartments up to 4 stories near transit stations. So depending on if they're in these kind of transit hubs, you give them even more leeway. You let them build. But even in some of these higher neighborhoods, we should be getting at least a 3 or 4 unit. Great opportunity to create housing and create a platform for people to have rentals, but also a great opportunity for you to add cash flow and therefore increase the values. Gone are the days where if you don't have a house, you could buy one. And now today we're entering a new dawn, a dawn where you can co-live in a 4-plex, right? Or a 4-story building where there's never been one before. Whether politicians will take this advice a year before an election in Ontario is another question. And the election, by the way, is June 2022. Also a pre-prediction that's going to have an impact in our market, as elections always do, as we noticed in this past year. If you guys could, if you're learning some new stuff here today, please consider liking this. You can leave us a comment as well down below and hit the subscribe button. I know a lot of you guys like to tag along, but you don't subscribe. This is your chance. And join our investor list, and you can get some off-market deals. Check out some of the fun stuff we have. I like to share additional content with you in that way. And we got that course. I'm excited for that to be in the new year. Hopefully have that released. Still working on it, putting together. Once we have that program organized, we're going to send that out to you guys. But it's a beautiful day outside. Nice snow. Get out there, guys. Get out there. But dress warm. Dress warm for safety, right? I had a friend. He stopped talking to me after I had this really bad accident a few years back. I lost 3 toes for frostbite. Not good, but apparently we couldn't be friends anymore because he was lactose intolerant. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Take care and keep it real.